American University in Bulgaria.
This program is brought to you by AUBG Talks. For more, please visit us at aubg.bg/talks.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear professors, dear distinguished guests, I'm very glad to welcome you to our event, The Challenges and Success of Balkan Cooperation. As you know, we're a voluntarily operated and politically neutral club that seeks to obtain all possible viewpoints from different political spectra and from different diplomatic viewpoints. Therefore, I believe that the profound experience and expertise of our distinguished guest today, Mr. Stamatopoulos and Ms. Bogdanska, are more than sufficient to cast light on the topic of the debate, which is the successes and challenges of Balkan cooperation. And I hope that you enjoyed the evening, and I hope that the productive question and answer session will ensue afterwards. Thank you very much.
And we asked Ulyana Bogdanska, Chair of the Political Affairs Directorate in Bulgarian Foreign Affairs Ministry, to speak and share with us her ideas about successes and challenges to Balkan cooperation first. So we'd like to give the word to you.
Thank you. I hope I'm fine with the technology part. Yeah, right, it's working. Dear Professor Easton, dear students, it was a pleasure for me to come here to cover this 100 kilometers from Sofia, this small part of corridor number 4, which I think is the most important corridor for Bulgaria, and to talk to you about a fascinating subject, the Balkans, our region, which I hope most of you come from the neighborhood or are interested in the neighborhood. So for both of these categories, it will be, I hope, an interesting evening. If I can share some of our views about the cooperation in the region. When you talk about the Balkans, there is always a kind of bad connotation. For many, many years in the past, the region was known as the powder box of Europe. It was also often considered to be the backyard of Europe. There is a Bulgarian writer, and his book starts with the sentence, I'm born in Bulgaria, the country where Europe ends but never starts. I think one of the most important challenges to the regional cooperation is to change such notions of the region and of the countries. I think this is no longer the case, and now I can boldly say that the Balkan countries have made tremendous progress. We have Bulgaria and Romania as member states of the EU, Croatia on the way to become a full-fledged member as of 1st of July this year, after the ratification procedure will be over. And all the other countries are involved in European and Euro-Atlantic integration processes. But for these very important Euro-Atlantic and European process, I will say a few words a bit later. First, let me try to give some overview of the most important regional cooperation initiatives and processes. I'm proud to say that back in 1996, Bulgaria was the first country to initiate a meeting of the Ministers of Foreign Affairs of the post-former Yugoslavia war meeting, when all the ministers of countries that did not exist before, for the first time, were sitting at one table. This meeting developed later into the only political political process originating from the countries of the region themselves. This is the Southeastern European Cooperation Process, CECP. We use a lot of abbreviations. I hope you will not mind if sometimes I use some of them. This process throughout the years has developed into the voice of the region, and it was recognized as the most authentic process by the international community. Nowadays, all Southeastern Europe countries participate in this political format. So from Albania, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Greece, Romania, Slovenia, Croatia, Montenegro, whatever. The only exception is Kosovo. And I will say a few more words about Kosovo because this is one of the painful subjects here. Bulgaria, we consider the full participation of Kosovo in the regional cooperation formats as one of the main challenges for the region. And we strongly advocate the development of inclusive regional cooperation as a vital element for moving forward the process of integration. There should be no black holes in the Balkans, and all countries should be engaged in the regional cooperation. The international community, in the beginning of the 90s, created the so-called Stability Pact for Southeastern Europe, which was established and meant to prevent conflicts and to help the countries get closer to the EU and become EU members later. This Stability Pact for Southeastern Europe was meant for the countries to hold their own destiny in their hands and to begin the process of transformation of the regional cooperation, then on the principle of regional ownership, which is a very important principle in the cooperation idea, was created the so-called Regional Cooperation Council, which is the successor of the Stability Pact. I'm proud to say that this happened during the Bulgarian chairmanship in office of the CACP. It was 2007 and 2008. And in fact, the first meeting of the Regional Cooperation Council was held in Sofia in February 2008, while its secretariat is located in Sarajevo. That is as a sign of the regional ownership of the process. The main success of the establishment of this council for us was the inclusion of Kosovo, even if it was under the reference of the resolution, UN resolution for Kosovo. You know that it is not included under its own constitutional name. But anyway, we consider this as a success. But during the following chairmanships after Bulgaria, with very few exceptions, this was no longer the case. Kosovo's participation in the Southeast cooperation process will remain problematic because, you know, several countries in this format have not recognized its independence and decisions are taken with consensus, so it will remain problematic. When we talk about regional cooperation, we should always have in mind that the ultimate goal of this cooperation is to facilitate the integration of the Balkan countries in the European and the Euro-Atlantic structures. It is not by chance that regional cooperation and good neighborly relations are essential elements to all the stabilization and association processes. They are an integral part of the political conditions for membership and are regularly evaluated by the European Commission in all stages of the integration process. The regional cooperation should lead to overcoming legacies of the past. This is a very challenging problem of the region. To overcome nationalistic populism, xenophobia, and ethnic nationalism, all the negative rhetoric which is sometimes present in some of the countries. The success of the process is well known. As I have already mentioned, there are 3 EU member states and 1 future member in few months. All other Western Balkan countries are on their way towards NATO and or European Union, despite their different stage of integration. Bulgaria systematically and consecutively pursues this policy of support for the European integration of our neighbors within different formats of political dialogue. Our country has provided and continues to provide political support for the advancement of this process. We have signed several memoranda for cooperation in the field of European and Euro-Atlantic integration with almost all Western Balkan countries. I think the most recent was with Montenegro and before that with the Republic of Macedonia. We support, of course, the visa liberalization process, which is so important, and for the countries which do not enjoy yet visa-free regimes. However, we have to say that the process of EU integration has its criteria and standards that should be met in order for the countries to advance. We believe that the principle of assessment on the basis of its own merits and should be very strictly respected. Let me enumerate some of the most important stages that we have reached in the European perspective of the countries and which will be evaluated by the end of this year by the European Union. The expected full membership of Croatia as of 1st of July next year. Croatia will become 28th member. It's a great example for the rest of the countries. It's a positive signal to the rest of them and should give the respective impetus for the other countries to continue with the reform process. On the 10th of October, now in October, the last enlargement package of the European Commission has been published, and for almost all of the countries, there were positive developments to be mentioned. I will just mention a few of them. Montenegro has begun negotiations. The first chapters are supposed to be open next year. Serbia has obtained a candidate status in 2012. By the way, Bulgaria was one of the countries that supported very much our neighbor to achieve that. In order to begin negotiations, on the other hand, Belgrade needs to normalize its relations with Pristina. We hope that the dialogue will advance for the benefit of the people. Albania maybe would obtain a candidate status in December 2012 if they succeed to adopt 3 important laws and to realize progress on 12 priorities. The European Commission recommends that accession negotiations should start with the Republic of Macedonia. There is no significant progress, I regret to say, in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The political stalemate in the country is a worrying signal, and it should be overcome. We hope that the 3 political entities that are responsible for the future of the country should come to better cooperation in their way forward in the reform process. The Commission is ready to recommend the opening of negotiations for signing a stabilization and association agreement with Kosovo if Pristina undertakes several steps. As you can see, the enlargement process is on its track, but there are a lot of challenges for the countries to tackle. I have already mentioned the inclusiveness of the regional cooperation. The Western Balkan countries all face serious economic challenges. We think that this, for the moment, it might turn out to be the bigger challenge than the political one for some of the countries. Support for economic and social development is clearly needed. In this respect, the role of the European Instrument for Pre-Accession for improvement the connections with the Union and in the regional framework should be strengthened, and the use of the countries are making of this instrument should receive more attention from their governments. The potential of the regional cooperation formats is still not fully used. There are vast prospects for further develop the cooperation in many areas, having in mind that the purpose of these regional formats of cooperation is to prepare the countries for their European and Euro-Atlantic future. I will mention just a few priority spheres which are very important. Transport and energy infrastructures. Maybe for the Balkans this is the priority number 1. We don't see anything much more important for the development of relations, the development of the cooperation between countries, and the whole set of indicators for the progress than infrastructure, all kinds of infrastructure. And then, of course, security, justice and home affairs. This is the big challenge to prevent and cooperation in preventing illegal migration, organized crime, corruption, and related issues, not to forget the more, probably the more developed cooperation in culture, education, science, and civil society cooperation. The subject is endless. I think I will stop here, and I'm ready to answer your questions should you take interest in anything. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And now we would like to give the word to Mr. Ambassador. Mr. Stamatopoulos is Ambassador of Greece to Bulgaria, and afterwards we'll have some time to answer the questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dear President, professors, and students, it's a great pleasure and an honor to address this very special audience on the topic of the successes and challenges of Balkan cooperation, and of course to offer a point of view from Greece. My good friend, Ambassador Bogdanska, was very specific, very hands-on. I will perhaps be a little less so in my speech and start by giving a little psycho-historical, let's say, angle and then proceed from there. As was already mentioned, this part of Europe, our common neighborhood, is often portrayed in a rather stereotypical manner as synonymous to endless national antagonisms and fragmentation. Lesser known is, however, the fact that the Balkans are also marked by an age-long record of efforts aiming at mutual understanding and cooperation. Suffice to remind in this regard two, let's say, examples that stand out. The first is the unique case of the Greek revolutionary ideologue and scholar Thrasyvoulos in the late 18th century. His call for a life free of tyranny, late 18th century, mind, and for what in contemporary parlance we would name rule of law, was addressed to all Balkan peoples at the time, including the then ruling Ottoman Turks, regardless of national or religious affiliation. I think he has remained in history as the herald of Balkan cooperation par excellence. The second category or example I would like to mention is the very dense and intense interplay among intellectuals, revolutionaries, enlightened merchants, and other actors stemming practically from all national groups of our region, Bulgarians, Serbs, Greeks, Romanians, and Albanians, over the first half of the 19th century and beyond. By way of example, I would recall the Greek connections fairly well documented by Bulgarian historians of the great Bulgarian intellectual, political, and military activist, Georgi Rakovsky. More generally, the search for entente and cooperation among the peoples of the Balkans has been a constant feature in this part of our continent, even when the individual countries of the region belong to opposing political and military alliances. The case of the Greek-Bulgarian rapprochement, for instance, from the mid-70s, 1970s onwards, within a framework of a broader effort for regional understanding, yet still under the circumstances of the Cold War and mutual suspicion worldwide, is indeed characteristic. Let me remark at this point that Balkan cooperation is not only a matter of romantic vision or voluntarism of the various players involved. It lies also on a solid bedrock of realities on the ground. The Balkans, to a large extent, constitute a natural whole, a continuum in terms of economic and human flows, geography, culture, and mentality. It has been so for ages and is bound to be likewise in the future. After the artificial estrangement from each other in the Cold War, from the late 80s, early 90s and on, it is like rediscovering these realities. At the same time, rediscovering each other. First and foremost, our commonalities. I'm convinced that what unites us is far bigger and more important than what keeps us apart. And I'm equally certain this is the best starting point for tackling the challenges and the unfinished business that still lies ahead. But I don't intend to burden you further with historical background, and I'd like to invite you to review with me briefly the main successes and challenges of Balkan cooperation in the present. Let's see how Balkan cooperation took shape, and I'll start with what Ambassador Bogdanska already referred to, the Southeast Europe cooperation process. Based on and inspired by the legacy I already referred to, in the mid-90s we witnessed the revival of the old attempts for Balkan Entente under new challenging conditions. End of the bipolar world, newfound political and economic freedom in Central and Eastern Europe, alongside the tragic events in the former Yugoslavia. The Southeast Europe cooperation process, a novel structure functioning at various levels, became the most genuine native regional cooperation forum created directly by the countries of the region themselves. At the beginning, Greece was the only EU member state in this regional forum. Soon, with the start of the accession process of Bulgaria and Romania, and even more vigorously after accession was completed, all three neighbors joined forces to get the EU interested and then actively involved in these regional activities. Now, thanks to a great extent to our joint efforts, the SCCP is closely linked to the workings of the Regional Cooperation Council, as already mentioned, our largely EU-inspired body that took over from the Stability Pact for Southeast Europe. Apart from these homegrown initiatives, however, I believe that most of us present here would concur with the idea that the European perspective is now the most powerful driving force for the integration, or one could even go as far as saying the reunification of Southeast Europe. Now, to earn my pay a little bit, let me talk about the broader framework of Greece's policy in Southeast Europe. One of the fairly unremarked Greek success stories has been the development of a culture of consensus, albeit painstakingly, over foreign policy issues. Over the last 25 years, more or less all major political forces in Greece have reached a common understanding as far as the basic guidelines of our foreign policy are concerned. This was made even more apparent in the area of Greece's foreign policy toward the wider region of Southeast Europe, to which she naturally belongs. Against this background, it is important to note that right from the outset, from the democratic changes in Eastern Europe in the early 90s, Greece has been a staunch and unwavering supporter of Bulgaria's and Romania's integration into the EU and the Euro-Atlantic structures. At the same time, we were fervent supporters of the opening of the European perspective for what became known as the Western Balkans. This was a strategic choice for Greece, tantamount to extending the area of peace, stability, and prosperity to this part of our continent. Or to put it in other words, we wish to see happen in our region something equivalent to what was the case between France and Germany in the aftermath of World War II, a process of reconciliation, good neighborly relations, and rapprochement that constituted the cornerstone for setting up the first European communities of the 1950s, the forerunner of the European Union. Over the last 2 decades, Greece has been investing an enormous amount of political, diplomatic, economic, intellectual, and human capital for the stabilization, democratization, and European perspective of the entire Balkan region. An outstanding landmark in this long and often bumpy course is what is known as the Thessaloniki Agenda, adopted by the heads of state and government of the EU in June 2003 under the then Greek EU presidency. The decisions made there about the European integration process of the Western Balkans sub-region remain a compulsory point of reference to this day. Allow me to dwell a bit on the outcome of the Thessaloniki summit, since it proved to have far-reaching effects. The seeds sown then continue to bear their fruit, as I will try to demonstrate. The Western Balkan countries were first recognized as potential candidates at the EU summit in Feira, that was in June 2000, under the then Portuguese presidency. What was the essential move forward of the Thessaloniki summit, however, is that for the first time ever, the EU stated categorically that the future of the Western Balkans lies within the EU, while at the same time setting out a comprehensive, well-structured and detailed program enabling this goal to be realized gradually over the following years. This in itself was very important, since some of the countries concerned, for instance, Serbia and Montenegro, one country at the time, did not have then any contractual relations with the EU whatsoever. I will mention only a few indicative examples of this long-term program that was then launched. Establishment for the first time of a regular annual political dialogue between the EU and Western Balkan countries at the levels of heads of state and government, ministers of foreign affairs, ministers of justice and home affairs. Gradual opening for the Western Balkans of important community programs such as Erasmus, that you may be familiar with being students. Up to then reserved only for member states and partly for full candidates. European partnerships, i.e. programs for fostering internal reforms tailor-made for each country, financed by the EU. A step-by-step liberalization of visa regime, the relatively recent end of 2009 EU visa-free regime for the citizens of Serbia, Montenegro, and the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, and a year or more later for the citizens of Bosnia and Herzegovina and Albania, is a direct outcome of the process put in place by the Thessaloniki Agenda. The same European Council of June 2003 constituted a landmark for Bulgaria and Romania as well, the only countries in this region that had been engaged in negotiations for EU accession already from the year 2000. The Thessaloniki European Council more precisely confirmed that Bulgaria and Romania were part of the same comprehensive and irreversible process of enlargement, while setting the target for their full EU membership for the year 2007, as was done. The political and diplomatic endeavors of Greece for the overall, one could call it Europeanization, it's a bit of an exaggeration, of the Balkans, were coupled with an unprecedented drive by the Greek private sector to invest heavily in the region, taking on considerable entrepreneurial risk, especially at the beginning, thus encouraging further foreign investments stemming from other parts of Europe and beyond. Nowadays, and despite the economic crisis, Greek investments in Southeast Europe still amount to about 20 billion euro, contributing to the creation of roughly 200,000 jobs. The Greek banking sector deserves special mention in this context, with its particular contribution through its about 2,000 offices deployed all over Southeast Europe. Last, by no means least, Greece has put forward an integrated development cooperation policy in this region, the Hellenic Plan for the Economic Reconstruction of the Balkans. I'm told in English it's called HYPERP or HIPERP. Under this program, a sum of 500 million euros, covering initially the period 2002 to 2011, was dedicated to financing the modernization of infrastructure, the promotion of productive investments, support for democratic institutions and the rule of law, strengthening of the welfare state. In other words, the objectives pursued by this Hellenic plan were meant to consolidate the European orientation of the region, underpinning each beneficiary country's individual efforts to eventually join the EU. Now, about the challenges ahead, and about healing old wounds in the wider region that still exist both in a material and immaterial sense. Greece will assume once more the rotating presidency of the Council of the EU for the first semester of 2014. One of the major targets of our presidency will be to revitalize the process for full accession of the Western Balkans to the EU, the Agenda 2014, as we call it. The date is not a coincidence. The year 2014 was chosen as a year of strong symbolism, marking the 100th anniversary from the outbreak of the First World War, which was sparked in the Balkans, although the root causes lay elsewhere. Completing European integration is a most pressing challenge in our beleaguered region. It is important to note that in promoting Agenda 2014, Greece is already working closely hand in hand with Bulgaria and Romania. I would like to conclude by emphasizing that European integration should not be seen as some sort of panacea, but to a very great extent as a major catalyst for sorely needed reforms within the societies of the candidate countries of the region. There is a lot to be done in parallel directly by all the countries concerned. In this regard, some of the main challenges to be tackled, closely interlinked, one to the other, could be summarized as follows. Complete the physical integration of Southeast Europe. I have primarily in mind road, railroad, and air infrastructure and connections. Those traveling across the region know how tricky it often can be to go from one capital to the other. Strengthen the integration of the region's energy networks. I could say also digital networks. Further promote the free and unhindered flow of goods, capital, and people within the region. Also further promote people-to-people contacts. The need for regional integration to be driven not only top-down, but also bottom-up by mobilizing the respective civil societies. This, in turn, will help overcome lingering and not always positive stereotypes that Ulyana referred to as well, which people may hold for one another. It will, at the same time, help consolidate a genuine spirit of good neighborly relations, which is one of the fundamentals of European integration as a whole across the entire continent. Achieving the above is a national, but also a joint effort that will bring us closer to each other and to our shared goal. Thank you for your kind attention.
And now we'll have, thank you. And now we'll have brief question and answer session. And I would just like to ask you to present yourselves and to just say to whom you're asking the question. Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Balkans. I'm a member of the Political Science Group, and my question is to Ms. Bogdanska as well as Mr. Stamatopoulos. Do you believe that the interference of NATO in the international community in the case of the Kosovo War and the Declaration of Independence of Kosovo has helped facilitate peace and cooperation on the Balkans or damage the relations between the Balkan states?
Would like to answer first?
Well, Ulyana's not volunteering, so. Well, it's interesting. It's particularly interesting for me because you may not know, I was ambassador to NATO until January 17th or something like that. But I wasn't there in 1999. I'm glad in a sense I wasn't, because it was a very, very difficult decision. And the Greek position was also quite special. Greece decided not to impede consensus. I could say veto, but a veto does not really exist in NATO. But decisions are taken by consensus. So if we said we are against, that would basically be the same. We did not stop consensus, but we opted out it was pretty much a first, I think, in NATO. We opted out. We said that we did not feel comfortable with this decision and that we would not take part in the operation. And as you know, it's no secret, Greece has not recognized the independence of Kosovo. For us, it's a matter of principle. Changing borders generally, but especially in the region, but also generally, through the use of force by anybody is something that we do not agree with. We are prepared to recognize the outcome of a negotiated settlement, which will include everybody involved, and that means Serbia, of course, I mean both Belgrade and Pristina, and in that sense, we are very supportive and very encouraging of the dialogue between Belgrade and Pristina. To close with our national position of this, which was not your question, but you gave me the opportunity to state it. We do not recognize Kosovo, as we said, but we have close relations. We do have a diplomatic liaison office in Pristina headed by an ambassador. We are very actively involved both on the EU side and on the NATO side and directly with Pristina and of course with Belgrade in trying to facilitate things and move things forward. And we intend fully to continue with what I'm describing and what we feel is a very constructive position while reserving our position of principle. I don't know whether it was the NATO intervention, however, that either helped or damaged. I mean, the situation was there. There was a situation on the ground that was very difficult. And it is true that the way Milosevic went about it was created a huge humanitarian crisis. And that strengthened the hand of those who felt that they needed to intervene. I was with our EU representation in Brussels at the time in the mid-90s to the year 2000, and I had close relations with the Serbian embassy there, and I tried to guide them in a way that I thought was appropriate, but of course our feeble voices were not to be heard at the time. It is true that the NATO intervention, the military intervention, I should say, I mean, all the military activity in the region, which was not only by NATO, obviously, has left scars. And it has created a bit of a precedent in changing borders. I mean, Montenegro and Serbia split, but it was an amicable divorce, let's put it this way, and it's qualitatively very different from what has happened in Kosovo. I don't know how helpful it is to hark back now to what's happened. I mean, it's useful because you need a basis, an analytical basis. I think the main thing now is to look forward. There are some situations that are now an inescapable reality, and it is on the basis of both principle but also of reality that we need to move ahead.
My answer would be a little bit the mirror of my good friend Ambassador Stamatopoulos, but because Bulgaria has recognized Kosovo, unlike Greece. At the time when this happened, we were not members of NATO, unlike Greece, which was a member of NATO, but we were aspiring to show our ability to be part of this Euro-Atlantic family. It was a very difficult decision. That is something that that is valid, I think, for many countries and most for neighboring countries, because like Greece, we are also a neighboring country. Everything which relates to our neighbors is much more difficult to decide upon than something which happens on the other side of the earth. So, for example, we remember that there was a rocket that fell in Sofia and hit a house from the NATO airplanes that were destined to go to Kosovo. And thanks God there was nobody killed, but it was a very difficult moment for the government to take this decision. It is never an easy decision, but as Ambassador already mentioned, the situation in Kosovo required specific measures, and the whole international community that we wanted to be part of wanted to see the end of this bloodshed and the end of the killings and the massacres in the country. So, in fact, Bulgaria gave airway access to NATO planes to do their job in Kosovo, although we were not part of the operation. And now, after that, we still think that every country has its right to self-determination, and we have recognized the expressed will of the Kosovo people for independence and for their own country. And we think that Europe will not be whole and will not be complete in the integration as long as there are black holes which are not fully integrated. And although at the moment the dialogue between Serbia and Kosovo is entering a new phase after Kosovo is not is this the how was the term for their controlled independence is over. We are of the opinion that it will be a test for the maturity of both countries to work on their relations. The dialogue has already started, and we are very supportive of every country that joins its effort, even the countries, and I'm sure that countries like Greece, they have their own reasons for not recognizing Kosovo, but they are fully engaged in integrating in different areas the people of this region, of this very close neighbor, not to be left out of the European integration process in general, and to be part of the efforts of the whole region for a better future.
Yes. My question is to Ambassador Stamatopoulos. I'd like to ask you if you can elaborate a little bit more on the relations between Bulgaria and Greece in the last 5 years. But I'd like to give you like 2 cases. If you can talk more about the perceptions of Bulgaria and Greece. Are we still considered like a poor neighbor, or are we a good neighbor? One of the cases connected to our university. I'm a recruiter in Greece. We have at the moment 3 students from Greece. Luckily for us, 2 amazing professors. But I was talking to some kids, and they said we don't want to go to Bulgaria because they consider it as a peasant country. They say like poor. It's a step back if we come here. I know you have another university, but still it's kind of competition. And the second thing, I'm from Bogdanska, a very small city. We were studying Greek. We changed our door signs with Greek letters, waiting for you to come when we opened the border here, waiting for tourists. We learned words like Haristo, Titanis, and all the rest, but there wasn't a wave of people as if that avoid us. Is there something like that? How do people think about Bulgaria?
Can we warm up those relations? Can we what? Warm up? Can we warm up, yeah. Yes, well, I think we are. It's an excellent question, actually, and one that I've been asking myself. I've been in Bulgaria now since end of January, I had been here 2 or 3 times, but on a business trip, so these are in and out meetings, basically. You don't see much, you don't get to meet too many people, and so on and so forth. I mean, my father's from Thessaloniki. I've lived in Thessaloniki for many years, so I'm not from all that far away, at least part of me isn't. I can't really, well, I can't answer the question. The short answer is no, nobody's avoiding anybody. Secondly, the fact that you don't have too many Greek students here may be due to other reasons. As a matter of fact, there's a long history of Greek students in Bulgarian universities. There are right now, I think, close to 2,000 Greek students in Bulgarian universities. It's not a small number. But they are in Bulgarian universities, Kliment Ohridski and Veliko Trnovo and Plovdiv, and I don't know where else. I personally know people who studied here many years ago. I mean, when I was asked by our Foreign Relations Committee at the Greek Parliament to go and talk to them about my job in Sofia and what I intended to do and exchange some views with them in a hearing that they held for me. The vice president of the committee who was presiding, who was a member of parliament, had studied in Bulgaria. So in some ways, you know, I had to note that in his CV because in some ways he knew more about Bulgaria than I did, you know, because I'd only been here for 3 weeks. I don't think that the reality is exactly what you feel it is. However, however, well, yeah, you know, who am I to comment on the words of a Greek student in this university? I mean, you know, people have their own views. I think I've answered that by saying that there are, you know, several tens of thousands of Greeks who have studied in Bulgaria. The other thing that I would say is that there's a huge Greek presence in Bulgaria in business. I mean, there are people who live here who work for Greek, but not only Greek companies in Bulgaria. Thirdly, there are vast exchanges of population every winter and summer between Bulgaria and Greece. Well, both. If you go to Khalkidiki, some parts in Khalkidiki in the summer, you better know Bulgarian because otherwise, you know, I mean, you may find yourself in a minority. But the same is true in the reverse sense in Bansko in the winter. I mean, our cooperation in these fields has gone as far as now having joint police patrols. The Bulgarian policemen patrolling with Greek policemen in Khalkidiki in the summer, and Greek policemen patrolling with Bulgarian policemen in Bansko and in the winter. I mean, we have moved exponentially, if you like. But I will address 2 of the points you made. One is, what do Greeks think about Bulgaria? It's true that, you know, in the minds of many, the memories are the negative memories of the past, you know, of wars, of occupation, of exchanges of population, and so on and so forth. But I think this is not uniquely Greek. I mean, I took part in a conference about 10 days ago, and there was a lady from Blagoevgrad who actually who came from a family that left Greece for Bulgaria with the exchange of population, and she was quite negative and bitter. She asked a question, and I answered it. But this is what we're moving away from. This is what Ulyana referred to before and what I referred to before. I don't think that's where the problem is. I am ready to admit that a lot of Greeks know little about Bulgaria or not enough right now. And this is something that perhaps we need to address, but this needs to be a joint effort. Because Greeks need to try and learn more, but also Bulgarians need to try and educate Greeks a little more. As for your place in the Rhodope, I haven't been there yet. I fully intend to go. The Rhodope Mountains are very beautiful on both sides of the border. I know the Greek side a little bit. I look forward to learning the Bulgarian side a little more. We have tried in the sense that we have agreed with Bulgaria to open border crossings in places that even 10 years ago, much less 30 years ago, it would have been unthinkable to think that there would be border crossings between the two countries. I don't know, maybe the Bulgarian authorities on your side of the Rhodope need to do a little more to attract people to come and, to sell the place, because it's a beautiful place and more people should come.
And we have time for a couple of more questions.
Nikolai from Bulgaria, student in European Studies. First, I would like to mention something about the last question. I think that the picture is not so bad because, about the song contest Eurovision, if you have observed it in the past few years, you would notice that Bulgaria almost always gets 12 points, which is a massive increase, and vice versa. Of course, I had a question to Bogdanska. While talking about the accession requirements from Albania and the other West Balkan countries, you said that there are 3 for Albania and some more for Kosovo and other countries. Can you please specify more about them?
You mean the requirements of the European Commission has to achieve, that the countries should achieve progress on in their way to the EU? That's what you mean? Yeah,
specifically for Albania you mentioned 3 steps, but as far as I remember...
No, the European Commission is, I just give a very brief picture of what they do. They get a mandate from the European Council, from the member states, to achieve some progress, to lead the process of European integration of the countries that have this European vocation and perspective in the Western Balkans. And they prepare the so-called, for example, for Albania, they have 12 priorities. I'm sorry I can't enumerate them. I don't have this paper with me. But usually, most of the countries get the same type of priorities that they have to show some progress on while preparing them for the next stage in their accession process. For Albania, the next stage will be to get candidate status. That is what will be debated maybe this December during the European Council, which usually assesses this process. The priorities are specific for each country, but for Albania, the problems for the moment are very political. Of course, if you would be more interested, I will inform myself about the exact nature of these 12 priorities. But they have to adopt 3 laws as well. The one important law is related to their political situation and election process. I'm not sure about the other 2. Most of the requirements, which are very important, are related to the justice and home affairs situation in the country, the fight with organized crime and corruption, and probably it is the civil society development of the country as well. Of course, the economic part of the progress of each country is also very monitored, because the region, although not part of the big world financial crisis due to its lesser developed financial system, the whole region is suffering the effects of the big crisis in Europe and in the world. So Albania is also a country which is not very economically very well developed. So I think that this would also be a challenge for them.
Yeah.
My name is Thrasyvoulos, and I have a question for Mr. Stamatopoulos. In your speech, you mentioned the challenges and opportunities. So I would like to ask you, how would you describe dispute between Macedonia and Greece, and how just to share your opinion about that problem, and how do you think this could end up?
I was surprised this question didn't come earlier. My opinion of this problem is that it's a problem that should have been solved some time ago. And I'm very sorry that it is continuing. Well, this problem from the Greek point of view has to do with policies and intentions that started decades ago from, well, at least from Comintern times. And they have to do with regional stability. They have to do with territorial integrity. They have to do with plans of some people or some organizations to have an exit into the Aegean and so on and so forth. And these are anachronisms, and they have to stay where they were. Greece supported the independence of the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia and recognized it very early on, and still supports its independence, its sovereignty, and its territorial integrity. The problem that we have is that we need to know what we are talking about. And if you like, monopolizing the name of Macedonia, which is a broad geographical region, was a mistake. And the way this started, even though there were some corrective moves made later on, but unfortunately not enough, still harked back to unresolved territorial issues, let's put it this way. I take it you are from there. If you are, you know the history, you know that the Constitution referred back to the Asnom Declaration, and the Asnom Declaration was very clear. I mean, it said that, you know, this part of Macedonia is the Piedmont of Macedonia to liberate the rest of Macedonia, and so on and so forth. Now, we need to move forward. And the proposal that we made is that we defined what we are talking about a little more clearly, and thus sort of put this problem to rest and relegate it to the past once and for all. Now, this has become more complicated because of domestic political issues, I would say, partly in Greece in a certain period of time, to be honest, but mostly on the other side, and especially in the last few years. We have the negotiations under the auspices of the Secretary General. The Security Council of the United Nations called for these negotiations back in 1993. It is now almost 20 years, too long. We were hoping, quite frankly, that at the Bucharest summit at NATO, this was a good opportunity to solve this, because there was a big incentive for Skopje, I mean, to solve this, to become a member of NATO. Unfortunately, this did not happen, even though negotiations were going on until, I mean, the last minute, but we were not successful. We are continuing in the effort to find a solution. We have said from the beginning, and the United Nations is saying that, but this is our national position as well, this needs to be a mutually agreed solution. Greece is not trying to impose a name, as sometimes you hear. What we want is some kind of determinant so that we know what part of Macedonia we are talking about, or that we are talking about a part of Macedonia, not all of Macedonia. I mean, don't forget that the biggest part of Macedonia is in Greece. So this makes people very uncomfortable. And we need to solve it. You may be aware that recently Greece took an initiative in early October, just a few days ago. The Greek foreign minister sent a letter, I have it here, to Minister Popovsky, his counterpart, proposing a framework, a memorandum, to try and push this process forward. This initiative has met largely with positive acclaim by the EU, by the UN, by the United States, partly by some people in Skopje as well. We are hoping that this can sort of give a further incentive to find a solution. But prolonging this doesn't help anybody, and it certainly doesn't help your country. I mean, this is the main thing. We are very sorry to see this not being solved because we have a stake in it. But I personally am even more sorry to see this not being solved because it helps some people politically in their own political goals, but it certainly doesn't help the people, and it certainly doesn't help the perspective of the country. So, I mean, people try to paint Greece as an enemy, and Greece is not the enemy. The enemy is elsewhere, and probably some of the more real enemies are people that now are couched as best friends. I mean, Greece not only accepted, but actually Greece pushed for the first cooperation agreement between the European communities. This was before the EU and Skopje. I can tell you for a fact because I was the Greek negotiator. And in 1997, very few of the other member states were favorable. Don't forget that, you know, people didn't really want to know about the Balkans then. And your country was the first country to sign a cooperation, first generation cooperation agreement with Brussels. And it was partly because we pushed for it. We ratified the Stabilization and Association Agreement in 2003. We agreed in 2005 to grant candidate status to your country. And again, I know because I was Director General for European Union Affairs at the time. You know. And we favored the agreement for the visa liberalization regime in 2009. And we are including all countries of the Western Balkans in our effort that I mentioned before, the Agenda 2014. We're not excluding anybody. So we want to put this behind us, but we can't do it alone. We feel that we have said that we will meet the other side halfway. Don't forget that the official Greek position was, and theoretically still is, because there hasn't been a political leaders meeting to change this, that we cannot accept a name that includes Macedonia in it. This changed. Now the position is that we are prepared to accept any name that will include Macedonia with a qualifier. Okay. Can be geographic, and this is basically what we're talking about, but it can be something else. We understand that this is difficult domestically also on the other side, but it is for us as well. If you look at the statistics on the Greek side, when this came up, the 65% or to 70% of public opinion was against a composite name in Greece. And in Macedonia, I'm talking about our Macedonia, it was up to in the 90s%. So we need to move closer and we need to solve this.
Thank you. Unfortunately, our time constraints don't allow for any more questions, and I would like to thank a lot our guests for accepting our invitation to discuss this topic, and also dear professors and students. Thank you for joining us, and there are refreshments outside if you want to stay and ask more questions.
For more, please visit us at aubg.bg/talks.